Teachers of Reddit, have you ever had a crush on a student? And if so, how did you feel about yourself? I used to teach entry-level programming at an art school to undergrads and later at the graduate level. It happened all the freaking time, but I never felt bad about it, cause they were adults and I was the same age. Obviously, I couldn't act on anything as a matter of policy, and I certainly didn't let it affect my grading. But goddamn, it was difficult, especially with the two instances where I could tell it was mutual. Or maybe it wasn't and they just wanted better grades, I don't know. They both got C's regardless. You could have at least upgraded them to a C++. They were lucky I rounded up from a C. Should have gone down for the D. My dad was my mom's professor in university. They got married. The marriage didn't go well. I am the result of what happens when people try to save a relationship by having a baby. Dude, me too. My parents are idiots. The frick were they thinking? Glad I was born though. Yay. Death is so boring. Don't know if you could necessarily call never having been born death. More like non-existence, unlife. College professor here. I get a lot of gorgeous students, but the attraction usually lasts as long as it takes them to open their mouths. What can I say, when you're in your 30s, 22-year-olds suddenly seem very shallow and immature to you. Trust me, you will come to think the same way. But then I had a student who was not only stunningly beautiful, but also very mature beyond her years, and she had a lot of similar interests to me. And what's better, because she was new to America from England, she was also a bit lost and confused, and I told her she could to me whenever she wanted if she needed advice and guidance. She did for a while, but I never did anything but just talk with her. As attracted as I was to her, trying to make a move would have been a very tricky thing, because student-teacher relationships are very taboo. The thing is though, as she adjusted to America she started coming by less often, because she didn't really need our talks anymore. After the class was over I hardly ever ran into her anymore, so the opportunity just never presented itself. I look back on it now as a for the best thing. Even if she had been interested in me, and I don't think she was, I'm quite used to my students, even the more mature ones, automatically seeing me as an old geezer, even though I'm 31 now and this was a couple years ago. If I'd had a relationship with her and we'd been caught, it could have potentially been the end of my career, or at the very least it would have gotten me in a lot of hot water. But I also found that shortly after the class ended and I stopped seeing her with any frequency that she fell out of my thoughts too, and I went back to being interested in women my own age who are preferably not my students. I'm actually glad that it doesn't bother me anymore, because I feel like it would be beyond pathetic for someone like me to be so hopelessly in love with a student. I worked at a daycare for 6 months as a college student and suddenly found myself attracted to 30-year-old single moms. I'm 22. Maturity is a turn on hair. I thought that was going another way for a second there. Sort of. I was 24 and she was 17, and I never did anything. But I totally acknowledged to myself that she was very pretty and clever. It made me feel weird, but I didn't sexualize her or anything. It was more a thought that wow, if I was 7 years younger, I'd totally be into her. But I didn't sexualize her or anything. Right. We got it, bro. Just saying. I had one dream about another student and it weirded me the hell out. I wouldn't let myself, because I'd feel guilty. You don't have to keep pretending. Reddit is anonymous. Once had a very attractive student teacher in my senior year. She was 24, I was 18. A ton of the other students were talking about how bad they wanted to frick her. I became pretty good friends with her. We read similar books, listen to similar music. And one day she asked me for a ride home, because her car wasn't working. I drove her to her house and she invited me inside. After talking for about an hour, we went into the bedroom and fricked. We kept it secret from everybody, and after I graduated we began a stable relationship. We dated for about 2 years until she moved to Washington. I would say she had a crush on me. I wouldn't read too much into the situation, honestly. Her car wasn't working. The moment you inserted your peanuts into her PP did AAA call to inform her that there was absolutely nothing wrong with her car in any way, shape, or form, and it would be able to be driven to multiple other countries without any mechanical problems of any sort while being driven at over 120 miles per hour consecutively through each said country while pumping cheap gas and old oil into the engine? I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of influence you have as a young 20s and successful teacher over high school age kids. I don't know how to say this, but you kind of get a free in as the young teacher because they can't relate to the more veteran teachers. The kids see a somewhat idealized version of you, and if you wanted to, it is quite easy to take advantage of that trust. This is why teacher-student relationships are avoided by teachers, because it's hard to tell what's real and what is a byproduct of that special mentor relationship. If you think your student is the one or something, just keep in touch and hit them up when they're an adult, mentally, not when they hit 18 and graduate. I teach kindergarten, so I don't exactly get crushes on my students. But as a person that doesn't want any kids themselves, there are a few kids, maybe 1 in 40, where I can't help myself from thinking I'd adopt the out of you if you didn't have any parents. It takes a special kid to bring out my paternal instinct. I would bang the majority of my moms though. Don't know a damn about how I was feeling, but my loins frothed up every time I looked at her. That sounds unhealthy and maybe infectious. I was a TA for a drawing class for a couple of semesters. It was the sort of TA position where the professor would hand you the outline for the semester and you'd teach one of his classes. There was this one girl that looked like a sort of Persian goddess. And she was freaking talented, which drew me to her even more. We got to the part of the class where we started doing portraits. I'd take volunteers from the class and we'd all draw them. I would bounce between critiquing students' work and doing the portrait myself, because observing is a great way to learn. The first few went very well. I was on my teaching game, and my portraits were up to my standards. Being a good sport, I'd give it to the model when they were done. The first one asked for theirs, and it just sort of became a thing. Then she came up. The thing about drawing is you have to be able to ignore your brain's preconceived ideas of what you are looking at and dissect the visual information analytically. I found her so beautiful. For the first time in my life I could not do this. I drew. I erased. I drew. I erased. I wasn't bouncing around as much as I had been, because I was so frustrated that I could not draw the one person in the class I wanted to draw. We finished, and it turned out okay. Not great, just okay. I still gave it to her, but I was honestly ashamed of it. At the end of the last portrait class, one of the models asked how they'd done. This led to a discussion on how they'd all done. Persian goddess asked the inevitable question. I told her she was difficult to draw. She asked why. I immediately regretted my initial response. I think I said something about her features being unusual or something cringeworthy. I wanted to tell her she was too beautiful, but I couldn't. If you're reading this, Persian goddess, I'm sorry. I should have told you that you were gorgeous. I work in a school and have never felt this way about a student, but I've known 2 teachers who fell for students, took it too far, and got fired. Each of them were profoundly unhappy people. 50 Shades of Grades. I taught a large lecture class at university level for a number of years. My department head clearly stated that hanky-panky with students was a fireable offense. There were opportunities, but I did not pursue. One situation, though not directly pertinent, stands out. When lecturing, I pay close attention to student reactions. In larger classes, I tended to settle on certain students for my repeated sampling. If they seemed to understand what I was talking about, things were okay. During one lecture on some fairly complex ideas, I had included, among other students, one beautiful co-ed. Until that day, I knew she was beautiful and appreciated her for that, but nothing more. Each time I spot checked, she was paying rapt attention, eyes wide, full of excitement at the knowledge I was dispensing. I was falling in love during my lecture. Such beauty, and she was enthralled with a topic that I totally loved. I required students to do a journal at the end of each class. She obviously had no clue as to what I was talking about. I was deeply puzzled. She had been right there, at every point. Later in the semester, I went to a men's basketball game. She was a cheerleader, and one of the prime ones at that. Even while our team was being embarrassed by the visitors, the cheerleaders kept doing their job, as if the fans' excitement would make a difference in this lost cause. And she was one of their leaders, eyes wide, showing the same excitement and verve that I had interpreted as her interest in my lecture. I learned a life lesson that day.